Welcome to Candlewick Library. I'm Cheryl. This video is going to be a little different than my other videos. I've just been thinking about something this morning and thought it might be a good thing to just talk about for a minute. I've talked before about the YouTube channel Mormon Stories, where they interview ex-Mormons, sometimes other people, but mostly ex-Mormons, about their experience, and they also do videos about LDS church history. And I've talked about how a lot of times I fall in a different place than a lot of the people that go on the show, but it's still been a huge help to me because no matter what the people believe about other things, about social issues, religious issues, spiritual issues, and where they fall, whether that's, anywhere from atheism to Christianity of some kind, we all have some very similar life experiences. And when you watch it a lot, you will start to see we say a lot of the same things. We had problems with a lot of the same things. We started questioning because of some of the same things. That tends to be one of the reasons people try to get us to not talk. Because once you see that multiple people are saying the same thing that they went through, or that the church used to teach, or something like that, and it's something that people want non-Mormons to not believe, or Mormons that are growing up right now, in the generation right now, that they wouldn't know about. For example, if someone went through the temple in my parents' generation, they would have had the covenants that they make, but they would also have penalties. They would have signs that they would do that went along with a penalty if they spoke about the things they were learning there, if they turned against the church, that they would be willing to die for it. That was something that I wouldn't have known was true when I heard people talk about it, if my mom hadn't been honest with me about the fact that that was still in it when she went through. But then I've heard other people since then talking about it that did go through during that. I trust my mom completely, so I knew that she was telling me the truth when she said she did it. Then people that went through at the same time as me, in the 90s, they took that out, and I went through in 2003. So when I went through the temple, I didn't have the penalties, but I still had all of the handshakes, all of the words, the costume changes, belling my face, all of that. And in the video that we watched, there was a person playing Satan, and he would turn to us in the audience and threaten us. If we didn't live up to every covenant we were making that day, we would be completely in his power. When one of the arguments about it not being a cult is that they don't control our behavior, that there aren't penalties, those of us that went through the temple at a certain time, we know that that's not always been the case. So if someone went through the temple right now, they would think I was making that up. They would think my parents were making it up, because going through the temple right now, as far as I know, they're watching a different video that is not the same one I watched or my parents watched, and has a lot more pictures of Jesus. They say it's so much Jesus now, but really it's just pictures of Jesus while they're doing the same thing they've done before. And as far as I know, from what I've seen and from what I've heard from people that have just gone through. And I have seen a video of it, so that's if it's the same as it was a few months ago. There are people who go into the temple while they still have recommends and videotape, because they are on their way out and they want to share what's happening. So you can see videos of at least my version and the new version online. If a 20-year-old girl was going through the temple right now, she would not have to veil her face. She would not have to say that she was going to hearken to her husband and he would hearken to God. She would be going straight to God instead of her husband. And they don't do the same exact costume changes. And the video, like I said, the video is different. And of course, the penalties and all that are gone. So they're still doing the handshakes as far as I know. They're still doing the same covenants that you don't really understand when you're going through for the first time. But you're told that every time you go through, you'll be learning more. And really, I never learned anything past what I knew the first time, except how to push down those feelings and pretend like I was getting something out of it. So anyway, so that was kind of a side tangent, but that's what I mean by it's helpful to hear a lot of different experiences, because if you are a 20-year-old girl right now, you go through the temple, you hear me talk about it, you hear somebody of my mom's generation talk about it, you're going to say, no, it's not. I was there. That's not what happened. And then you're going to tell people they're not telling the truth. That's not what happens at all. But if multiple people that have gone through something are saying almost exactly the same things or exactly the same things, then it starts to paint a bigger picture. All of this comes down to this. I was watching a Mormon Stories this morning while I was exercising, and in it, the family was talking about their son being on a mission. And this is the second story I've heard The other one wasn't on Mormon Stories. I can't even remember where it was, but this is the second story I've heard in the last few weeks. When you go on a foreign mission, the mission president will take your passport. They hold all the passports. They think it's safer that way. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I don't know. My husband went to Brazil and his passport was taken away. And as far as I know, that is illegal. I don't know if the church has connections that have made it so that they can, or, if it's not illegal, if the person willingly gives it to you. I'm not sure. This kid on his mission started to get depressed, and the family wanted to bring him home. They see that their kid is completely changing. He is not who he was when he went on his mission. And they talk to him, and he says they're making him go to a counselor. He feels like he's getting worse every time he talks to this LDS counselor. They can tell that they are losing their kid. So the dad calls the mission president and says, my son needs to come home. The mission president says, I'm not sending your kid home. And he says, you're sending my kid home. No, we're not. He gets to talk to the son. And I don't know what the details of that were. When my brother was on his mission in the 90s, and when Doug was on his mission in the late 90s, or in the I think it was either early 2000s or late 90s into the 2000s. Both back then, you could only write letters and you could talk to your family on Christmas and Mother's Day. Now that they have emails and things like that, they can talk a lot more. But so I'm not sure how he talked to his son, if it was on the phone or through email. But he talks to his son and tells him, I'm going to buy you a plane ticket and you can come home. And the kid says, well, I don't have my passport. And so they realize they cannot do it without the help of this mission president. He needs to give him back his passport. He needs to let him leave. And the mission president still refuses. Again, this is the second time I've heard this story in a few weeks. Different family. So this particular father had some government connections. He calls one of them, who is also an LDS man, and he says, I need you guys to do an investigation into this. I need you to get my son home. And this particular man says, well, this would look really bad for the church. You should call the mission president back and tell him you have these connections, but you don't have to necessarily do anything about it. If he refuses after that, then you can do something about it. And the man talked to his father, and his father said the same thing. Like, if you need to go that far, then go that far. But if you don't, then don't, because this will look really bad for the church. Anyway, so he does. He calls the mission president. The mission president says, I need to pray about it, and then I will get back to you. So, of course, once he gets back to him, he's probably talked to upper church leaders or something, and he says, okay, we'll send him home. And he says, you're sending him home honorably. You're not giving him a dishonorable return from his mission. He's like, fine. So that's what happens. The whole family ends up leaving the church eventually. This man in particular, the father, he also, in the same conversation, he's talking about how as he's losing his faith, he was a gospel doctrine teacher, which is kind of like the Sunday school for adults. And he has somebody ask a question that he's like, I can't answer that. There is no excuse for that. And he realizes, I just can't do this anymore. So he goes to the bishop, which if you watch my videos and you know anything about Mormonism, the bishop is the man from the ward that is put in charge of the congregation. This is not somebody with theological training. This is not your typical pastor, but they are still in charge of the spiritual shepherding of the people of this ward for a certain amount of years. It's just a calling. Just like I've had callings teaching primary, so that was teaching children, teaching young women with the girl teenagers, teaching activity days, which used to be which was girls that were like 8 to 11, that before they went into young women activities for that. Every member is supposed to have a calling, and you're not supposed to say no to it. In fact, most of the people I knew would never say no matter what the calling was. I was not that way. I did say no a few times, but only if I had a good enough excuse, and I still felt so guilty about it. He went into the bishop and said, I am not coming back to church for a while, and I need to be released from my calling. And the bishop said, I'm not releasing you from your calling. And he's like, okay, well, you do what you need to do, but I'm not going to be here next week. And that brought up some feelings with me this morning as I was watching it, because I'm listening to all these stories that are so similar to things that so many people have experienced. But until you get to a point where you can question the church, you do put it on yourself. You don't realize how wrong it is. And what it brought up with me was when we lived in Wisconsin and my girls were really, really young, I had two callings. And one of them was in activity days and one was as a primary teacher. And I enjoyed the activity days. That was fun. It was every other week for a couple of hours, and and we were working with really fun young girls, being able to think up fun activities, and it was a calling I was really good at. Primary teacher, I am good with kids. I did not enjoy it, and I wasn't enjoying doing both. And I really wanted a calling that wasn't every single Sunday, because at this point I was teaching my daughter preschool. My daughters did go to public school for a while before we started homeschooling, but I did do preschool myself because I had been a preschool teacher prior to having children, and I just thought it would be dumb to send her and pay somebody else to do preschool when I knew how to do it myself. And that was before homeschooling was even on the radar for us, but basically I homeschooled preschool. So I was doing that with her. I was also taking care of a toddler, and just life in general was busy. And I felt like having two callings, even though one of them was relatively small and the other one wasn't one of the biggest callings you can have necessarily, since it was once a week and then occasional primary activities, I still felt like it was taking me away from my responsibilities and duties as a stay-at-home mom and teaching my children. Then I wanted to have it take away. I just felt like it was too much for me at that stage. And I did the same thing. I went to the bishop. I said, I want to be released. And in fact, I don't think the bishop even met with me. I think he made me meet with one of his counselors. But I said, I don't want to be a primary teacher anymore. I'm okay staying with activity days, but I want to be released as a primary teacher. He was like, okay, well, we'll need you to keep doing it until we make that decision. I talked to my friend who was in the primary presidency, which is a woman and some counselors that are in charge of just the primary. They answer to the bishop. And I told them I've asked to be released from this calling, so please help that to happen. It was at least 2 months, and I was still having to teach. Nobody was saying anything to me. Nobody came back to me. I'm still having to go every Sunday, and I kept reminding them. So at the 2-month point, I'm like, hey guys, remember how I asked to be released? When are you going to release me? And it's like, oh, we're still working on that. Okay, so I had to keep going. And one Sunday, I just didn't go. And that was not like me. I am not somebody who shirks my responsibilities, doesn't show up when I'm expected somewhere. And so the friend that was in the primary called me afterward, are you okay? And she was worried about what might have happened that made it so that I wasn't there at church that day without letting someone know I wasn't going to be at church that day. I said, I've been asking for months to be released from this calling. It still hasn't happened. And I needed to show you guys I'm serious, I guess. I'm not going to come and teach again. So if I'm at church, I'm not coming to primary. And I was released the next week. So that reminded me very much of the story where when people argue that the LDS church is not a cult, like I said, they will use things, they will argue about everything is voluntary. Tithing is voluntary, callings are voluntary, everything is voluntary, going on a mission is voluntary. You don't take into account the fact that nothing feels voluntary unless you are not allowing yourself to see it any other way. If you don't go on a mission, there are girls that won't marry you. Your family might be expecting it. My husband did not feel like he had a choice. He wouldn't have gone on a mission if he felt like he had a choice. If you don't get married in the temple, which means you have to be going to church regularly, believe in all the things, be able to answer the questions, and paying your tithing, which is 10% of your income, then you believe you won't be with your family in the celestial kingdom for eternity. So you become the weak link of the family chain. If you don't have a calling, if you say no to one, you believe that you are going to be punished. God is going to be mad at you. You are supposed to. This is your duty to say yes to a calling. If you don't go to church, if you don't do all of the things, then you are not living up to the covenants and walking what they would call the covenant path. So it was just something that brought up a lot of these feelings with me today, to think about how you will hear from a lot of people. There's probably people that will comment on this video or other ones I've made that will argue these points, that say, it is 100% voluntary. There's no control, but there is such a thing as behavioral and emotional control when it's not physical control. They can't force me to go to church. They're not going to show up and force me. On a mission, they have a lot more control of everything of you, but they're not going to in a normal person's life. They're not going to come over and make sure I'm wearing my garments or any of those things, but there are rewards and punishments for you, whether it's here or whether it's in eternity, if you don't do the things, and that equals control, and it equals no boundaries. And they do feel like they can tell you that you have to show up for this job, even though you're not getting paid for it. And I've watched around me over the past few years, as my eyes were opened, I've been watching the people around me that are the most devoted to the church and how many callings they have and how much time it takes away from their family and the rest of their life, and how much you give and give and give and give. And then it really does feel like when you need something back, too bad. And I think that when you're in the middle of it, you don't see that. You think were going to get blessings. When my in-laws went on their 2 missions back to back a few years ago, it was, they truly believed that all of us kids and the grandkids would all be blessed because of them being there. You know, and anything good that would have happened to any of us would have probably been attributed to the fact that they were sacrificing like that, because they believe that. Everyone will tell you, I'm doing this huge sacrifice, but our family is going to be so blessed for it. So I just feel like this is something that needs to be talked about more. What are the boundaries that you are creating in your life so that you don't fall into a cult, that you don't fall into a situation where you are giving to people who don't give back in the way that they should, or that where you are allowing somebody to control you in a way that isn't right and isn't normal, but it becomes normal. So I don't know if all of that, it made sense. This was a very quick put together, like, I want to talk about this for a minute. I would love to hear how people, if you go to a church, what are the red flags for you as far as boundaries and control? For me, if I was going to a new church, a Christian church of any kind, if there was anybody that told me that I couldn't ask questions or made me feel dumb, or maybe like I was doing something wrong by asking a question, if there was somebody who expected me to do something and tied it to like my eternal salvation or something like that, those would be the red flags for me now. I think my husband and I and my children, that is going to be one of the issues that we probably struggle with for a very long time, is the trust of someone that's a leadership in a church type of situation because of what we've gone through. And so I would love to know how other people deal with that. How do you deal with boundaries in churches or in relationships, if you've ever had any experiences like this? Because I think a lot of times there are Christians and other religions that also have gone to churches where there's these kind of situations where they are putting so much control on you. And but I think for the most part, most of the Christians I know have never experienced this. And so I would love to hear what people think of it, and also just wanted to put it out there so people understand it, because that's one of my missions, I guess, on this channel, is not only just to talk about books, but to also have a place where there is a Christian speaking about Mormonism, because so many of the voices out there are atheists or agnostics. And I think it is important for me, an ex-Mormon who is Christian, to be speaking this stuff so that Christians won't get fooled by Mormonism, because I think a lot of people do. I saw something a couple of days ago from someone who had converted, and he posted online and he said, "Why isn't this church what I was taught before I got baptized?" And he was so confused and so scared and just freaking out because he believed he was joining this beautiful religion. And then he got to be a part of it and saw the truth, a lot of the truth that members wouldn't think anything of because it's so normalized. But it was history and it was obligations that he did not know he was getting himself into. And I think that for a lot of people, you have Mormons in your life, you have friends or you have family or coworkers, and Mormons can be some of the nicest people in the world. That also can be the opposite. I would say that if you are a Christian that never speaks negatively about Mormonism and have never been a Mormon, most Mormons you meet are going to be the best people. They're going to be the kindest people. If you are someone like me, they are not going to be, for the most part. So it does kind of depend on your circumstance, what you see. However, I would say that so many of them would be that way to both of us. And so you can't paint everybody with the same paintbrush. However, there is a really scary underbelly to Mormonism that you're not going to see, and that a lot of them might not even know is there or realize, because it is so normalized and you are not allowed to talk about it. So when someone says what we do in the temple is not secret, I saw a pastor, he works with Mormons here in Utah. He came here to work with Mormons. It actually really bothers me sometimes to watch things that he puts out, because he says that he's trying to point out the differences while building relationships. But if I had been a Mormon fully believing but starting to question, and I saw his videos, I would never have gone further, because he would have made me feel comfortable in being Mormon. He made a video recently saying that the things in the temple weren't secret, and that he was able to go through an open house of a new temple that was built. And that it made me really mad, actually, when I saw the video. It really bothered me, because what you see, if you go through an open house of the temple, which you can do and definitely see what it looks like, But if you do that, you are not seeing what we do in the temple. You're only seeing what it looks like. And when they say, oh, we do covenants here or we do marriages here, they're not telling you what those things entail or the words that are said in them. We are told it's not secret, it's sacred. And we don't talk about sacred things. One of the things you'll hear a lot of Mormons say is that they'll tell you they had a great experience, but they can't talk about it because it's too sacred. That's in life in general with their own spiritual experiences. But then when you have the temple stuff, that's the same thing. So if you ask one of your friends or family members or somebody that is Mormon and you say, I've heard all these horrible things about the temple, it looks like a cult, all these different things, they'll say, no, it's not true. It's not secret. It's sacred. We don't talk about the things that happen, but they're not weird. They're not different. And all you have to do is Google LDS temple ceremony and you'll see what has happened from the hidden videos. Well, I just don't want people to be fooled by it. That's not saying to hold it against your Mormon friends, because like I said, a lot of Mormons have no idea. I had no idea. I believed I was a full Christian. I believed that I knew everything about my religion. I was uncomfortable with some of the things. I didn't understand some of the things. I had things that I put on my shelf, as I've talked about in other videos, that I thought were wrong or I didn't like. I didn't know the half of it. And so since I am a voracious researcher, studier, learner, as all of you know that watch me, I'm not somebody who just doesn't ever dive deeper. I'm not somebody who doesn't read. And so the fact that I could be somebody like I am that wants to know everything about everything and I still didn't know means that the average person doesn't know. So the average Mormon doesn't know a lot of the things that I've talked about. So when they say that it's not true, it might be that they're hiding it because they can't talk about it. And they aren't trying to lie to you or anything, but they just feel like they're doing something wrong if they talk about it. And some of them just don't know. Anyway, sorry for this long kind of rambly video. Hopefully I had a point in here for any of you and that this was interesting, but I would just like to know your thoughts on this stuff. And like I said, it was just something that as I was watching this morning, I felt like I really wanted to talk about it and just hear what people have to say. So thanks for watching.